Over each of the last 4 years in New York, approximately 20% of their students required to take the Common Core exams in grades 3 through 8 did not do so. That over 1/5 of students were withheld from the tests by their parents is a remarkable percentage, given that parents don't normally defy the mandates of the education leaders from the local schools and the state education department. That such a large percentage of parents have done so is in large part the result of the efforts by Long Island Opt-out and New York State Allies for Public Education, which were largely initiated by parents who decided to opt their children out of the tests, including the 2 parents in this video, Jeanette Deutermann and Lisa Rudley. In this video, they began by describing the negative effects that the Common Core standards and exams had on their schools and their children's teachers, and most importantly, on their children. Furthermore, they describe how they organized to affect education policy, including organizing high-impact but low-cost demonstrations, and lobbying members of the New York State Board of Regents, the Commissioner and Chancellor, state legislators, and the Governor. They contributed to changing the policy regarding how the test results were used, but also, most importantly, disrupted the administration of the standardized tests, making them almost useless for many school districts to assess teachers, students, and schools. Consequently, the state education department placed a 3-year moratorium on using the tests to assess teachers. They also want to do more than criticize education reforms focusing on standardized tests and curriculum. They propose that schools need to be redesigned to promote the whole child by developing integrated curriculum and authentic assessment that enables students to critically analyze the world from their local to their global communities.
I've been a big proponent for special education rights for parents, and I came into this movement about 5 years ago in terms of the opt-out movement and data privacy protection. When I saw that there was a huge shift in how we were looking at public education and what was happening to our classrooms. And this movement has taken on a life of its own, and it's been an amazing journey, and I'm glad to tell the story.
My name is Jeanette Deutermann, and I'm a mother of 2 boys. One is 11 and one is 14. And I started Long Island Opt-out back in 2013 when I saw what was happening to my own son in public school. We have great schools. I went to the same public schools that my kids are going to, and I saw a shift, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know why it was happening. I grew up in a family of educators, so I knew who to ask and how to ask the question of what was going on, and I didn't like the answers. And I felt that that parents needed to know what I was finding out, and I needed a way for them to find that out. And Facebook was something I was using and was on, and my sister and I had been talking and said, well, why don't we start a Facebook group? Maybe we can get the word out on what's going on. And we did, and now we have 25,000 members on the page, and parents have really started this whole network to talk to each other about what they're experiencing and figuring out how we can fix the problems that we see in our schools. When I started noticing issues for my own kid, and noticing that there was something that had changed significantly and very quickly. This wasn't just a slow, year after year, slowly things are shifting, and I just attribute it to the fact that he's getting older. This was sudden, and it was still when he was in the younger grades. And I noticed a shift in the teachers that I was friends with. Their behavior and their attitude and their level of stress and how they were talking about what was going on in their classrooms. So I started asking a lot of questions. And the more questions I asked, the more upset I was getting about what I was hearing. And I knew it was more than just, this is the way it is, or kids are just, this is their age, or this. I knew it was more. And I wanted to not only give parents information that I was starting to get, but I also wanted to connect with other parents to hear what they were going through. Because it was very upsetting as a parent to watch your kid really start to deteriorate and behave this way and have stress symptoms. So starting the social media group was sort of just a way to say, hey, you know, here's what I'm seeing and here's the problem. Is anybody else feeling the same way? And here's what I found, and here's some things I discovered. Here's an article. Here's, you know, I would ask teachers to, in the very early days, one of the most powerful things was asking teachers to tell me what they were experiencing in the classroom. What were the kids experiencing? What were they experiencing as teachers? And they would send me the information and I would post it anonymously, because especially back then and still now, one of the most disturbing things that I found was that the teachers would have to tell me, like almost in a whisper, in private, in secret, like, don't tell anybody that I told you this. And I just thought that was absolute insanity. This is something that's happening to these kids. These teachers see it happening. They don't like it. They want to stop it. And yet they felt that they couldn't say anything. So here, the people that were the ones who knew the most about what was going on and how bad this was for kids, and they couldn't tell anyone. And I just felt like, oh my God, well, I'm going to tell them for you. So really, that was really a major, you know, focus in the early days of opt-out and still is really, is to say, well, you know, we'll be your voice, and to get that conversation and that, you know, that story of what they're seeing inside the class. We don't know as parents what is actually happening during the day, you know, in the classroom, but they do. So those stories were so important to get out there, and we did.
The perfect storm for me was when my fifth grader, my son with special needs, was in an inclusion class where it's co-taught with a special education teacher and a general education teacher, was no longer able to manage the classroom. He was put in a resource room, and I couldn't understand why. And it became very apparent when the teachers said, well, everything has changed. We have to follow the Common Core standards. Our teachers' test, you know, our teacher evaluations and principal evaluations are now tied to test scores. There's a lot more emphasis on that, and we have to really prepare the students to do well on the tests. And they said on top of it, it's about 2 to 3 grade levels above where your son is at. So he was actually having the most difficult time. That behaviors that I hadn't seen in years started coming out. And they actually put him in resource room for most of the week. And he was able to, and they worked on the testing and the common, you know, the ELA and math to make sure he was prepared. And I remember all the reports that came out that next year, the annual review of how his behavior was aggressive, and, you know, he wasn't understanding like he was. All of a sudden, he was 5 levels behind where he was. So as the activist as I had been for him, clearly there was something really bad going on. And New York State Allies started, it'll be 5 years this July, because parents across the state started not only seeing things happen, as Jeanette explained, with their own children in the classrooms, and not just children with special education, children with that were English language learners, general ed students, but there was something else happening with the Race to the Top grant that we received. We were required to bring on the Common Core standards, new assessments, teacher evaluations, but also this database of information that was being collected. And we said, wow, our kids are going to be profiled, and there was going to be a lot of data mining. And the picture became as crystal clear as it could be that somebody was looking to shut down public education, that the big dark money forces were really out there. We connected a bunch of leaders who had already started Facebook groups like Long Island, who had already started doing a lot of research and looking at what was happening around our state and around the country. And we all met up in Wegmans, which is a grocery store up in central New York. And we said, we need to amplify this message in a fast way. And how are we going to do that? We need to be a clearinghouse of information. So we created the website, New York State Allies for Public Education, nicesafe.org. And literally over a weekend, we started putting everything together. And we started connecting all the Facebook groups that were out there. We had some teachers and parents and principals meet. And it was really clear that we were in an emergency situation and that we needed to tell the story, and we needed to have a place where people can come and get information. And so we started this website. We started deciding how are we going to get this information out. We need to have education forums. We need to really spread the word and have the conversations with people.
So at first it was really about really wanting parents to just understand they could do this if they had a kid who was going to suffer through these tests and the test prep and the stress and what was going on. When it was linked to teacher evaluations, it really did cause such havoc in the classroom. And there really was this sense of panic for months leading up to these assessments. And so I think in the early days, it really was like, how many parents can we help? How many kids can we help? After the first year or two, when the opt-out numbers started growing and we started getting legislators that were, messaging us and wanting to meet with us and can we talk to you and what do you need and, going up to Albany, then we realized that those opt-out numbers were translating into something else. They were translating into us having sort of some power behind us and being able to push for changes. So then the numbers became about a little more so than just, let's save this kid, which it still is. It still does have that. But it really then, we recognize that opt-out numbers equal to voting block. And once you have a voting block, then you get listened to. And then legislators worry. They understand what that means.
Then we're going to disrupt the system. And we need to disrupt the system, and we need to do it quickly. Because the system is being, we're being disrupted. So we need to disrupt back, and at the same time, we need to protect our children, and we need to take back our power in our schools and for our kids. And I've got to tell you, the work that was done from every single corner of the Empire State, every region, was amazing, because parents, the ideas and creative ideas that came out, I'm sure we don't even know all of them, but it was amazing how everybody came together and started realizing that they can make the difference. And people started going to their school board meetings. They started showing up at Board of Regent meetings, which is the body of Regent members are the body of a governing board that watches over New York State education. But at the same time, we realized that schools need to be accountable to students, and that we weren't going to be dismissive of parents who relied on something, of how their schools were doing. But this was clearly misguided and in the wrong direction. And in fact, so that the policymakers and even lawmakers were defending it so much that they were actually, when they were called to the carpet, they were in shock by the amount of people through social media that came out and spoke out.
At first, the initial aim was to protect, each individual kid, and then it became that we really needed to make sure that parents, it wasn't necessarily just about opt-out numbers. I had always said, and I still believe that if a parent wants their child to sit for this assessment, I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is them having their child sit for the assessment thinking that the assessment is actually for their child, is good for their child, is going to help their child, is going to help their education. Districts would try to stop kids from opting out, so we had to find creative ways around districts that tried to stop it. And we were very successful with that, but it was a lot for me to sort of negotiate with all these different 124 districts, I started building sort of a team on Long Island, and it's like my steering committee where I asked parents if they could volunteer in each of their districts. So then I had district leaders, and those leaders, I put them together on a Facebook group, and they would help each other. Those leaders would go to their Board of Ed. They became leaders in their community. They went to the Board of Ed meetings. They started their own Facebook pages just in their own district.
And a lot were educators too.
A lot of them were teachers in other districts that lived in a different district that they became a leader in. And that has really been sort of the difference on Long Island, is having this team that works together, that helps each other. Those leaders have now gone on to become, one of them was just voted as a state assemblywoman. There's many of them that have run and won and are sitting on their school boards. Some of them are holding other positions in local government positions. They've taken jobs at places that specifically are involving this type of activism, and I think that's, like, to me, that has become, again, you're shifting from, okay, what do we want? We want opt-out numbers. We want parents to know what's going on. We want to try to impact the test, but we're also building leaders. We're building, and we're creating this atmosphere where parents feel confident in advocating, whether it's just for their own child, it's for the community at large, it's for everyone in the state. We've shifted also into whole child teaching and learning, because it's not just about saying no to taking state assessments. The whole point of that now is really to make room for whole child policies. If you have these assessments there, you have test prep, you have, the whole curriculum is geared towards test questions and how the kids have to be sort of prepared to answer in those particular ways that the assessments are created. Once you take that off the table, for instance, in my son's class, there's only a couple kids that still take the assessments. So every year in my son's class, those teachers go into the school year knowing that these state assessments are not a factor. And that leaves room now for so much other types of teaching and learning that can be so much more authentic. And that's sort of the driving force behind now what I feel, for me personally, is what I'm trying to push for is the state and the federal government are still enforcing this 3 through 8 testing. But what we can change today is every classroom can be rid of the state assessment. That's in our power. And every school board can put in policies that de-emphasize the state assessments. So we can do that shift on our own, and it's understanding that local control can really have so much more of an impact than just dealing with the federal or the state guidelines or the state regulations or the state laws. That we really can significantly change our schools and change everything about the way they look ourselves, in spite of those mandates.
So we have this test, and parents found out, okay, what's the natural question? Well, what do you do with the test, and what do you find out from these assessments that we put multiple millions of dollars in and multiple millions of dollars of resources and time and energy? We find out we don't get them back until way later in the summer. The information is not extremely valuable for the individual students, and it costs money for each local school district to administer these tests. But still keeping in mind that it's really important that we do need to know how our children are doing, and that's still very important. And I would argue we've had close to 20 years of annual testing, and we know where the challenges are and the gaps are. What are we doing about it as a society?
Like we said, these tests are like taking a sick person's temperature, but never doing anything when they find that they have a fever. What are you doing? So you're using the test as a weapon.
You know where they're at.
You're saying we need to use these tests to evaluate the schools and find out who's struggling. Well, first of all,
schools gotten even?
We know what schools are struggling. So where's the resources and where's the fix? What are you doing about it besides punishing them? you know, using the test to figure out who's failing and then punishing those who are, that's completely, that does nothing to solve the problem or help these schools. If they use the test to identify who's struggling and then swoop in with all sorts of, you know, resources and help and asking those schools, what do you need? A lot of times tests are just measuring poverty. They're measuring income levels. So, okay, we know where the struggling students are. We know based on income levels. So now what are we going to do? Are we going to fix the systemic poverty issue? No, that would be, you know, that would require some real work. Instead, let's just put a list out, label who's failing, then we can privatize, we can put the charters in. But, you know, until they're going to use these assessments for what assessments are intended to be used for, is to help the students. My kid will not, you know, is not going to have any part of these.
And the tests in and of themselves have shifted on what a passing score is. So they've raised the so-called bar of what is proficient. And it's just incredible how only 40% on average, 35 to 40% of students are considered proficient. And I would go as far to say, well, if the federal government has required us for all these years to give these tests, to say we want to see where the opportunity gaps are or the achievement gaps are, and the fact that these gaps still exist, that they actually should be held accountable, and they owe the states and the generations of kids that have gone on to not have the brighter future that they deserve. They should be held accountable, because I think it's criminal the amount of money that has gone into this and the people that have made money off of the education industry without the results. And they keep pointing the finger, but we know that we need the resources, and they've not come through. So here we are today, still talking about a lot of the issues, but I do think one of the big shifts that we need to really address is that people and parents and educators and everybody who cares about our kids and community members have come together and have been empowered to really ask the questions, how can we improve the life of every kid, whether wherever you go, whatever school you go to, how can we make our next generation of students and kids successful, because we want our society to be a healthy, happy society.
Every year, you know, the naysayers, the organizations that push corporate reform, that want schools taken over by charters, they need this system in place. They need schools to fail. You can't take over a school and move in a charter unless you can prove that they're failing. These assessments do just that. So every year they're looking for the opt-out numbers to decline, and honestly, they could, you know, you only hit a certain point. You're not going to keep going up every year. We had 250,000. Long Island, we're over 50% opt-out. It's just not possible to keep going up higher and higher. Maintaining is very difficult, because these are all volunteers. We're all volunteers. We all do this, you know, whenever we can fit the time in. Every year, what people forget also is that every year you have a cohort of students that exit the opt-out movement because they age out. They're no longer in 8th grade. My older son is not opting out this year. I'm very upset about that. You know, so every year it's about 40,000 kids that need to be, of 3rd grade parents that need to kind of come into the movement to keep the exact same number. So when we dropped from 20% to like 19%, and all the reform organizations were celebrating, and they were saying, "Oh, it's falling apart, it's declining," and I said, "Are you kidding me? I'm so happy that we got, you know, what, 35,000 new parents instead of 40,000. You know, what has to happen to maintain that number is an outstanding amount of work. To me, if we get over 10% any year, I'm extremely happy, because that's, to me, enough to disrupt the system. It means that there's a lot of parents that are paying attention. It means that parents are taking steps to protect their kids against what's going on. Any kid that sits for, I'm the one who has to get flooded with messages every year at testing time from teachers that anonymously send me messages or send me a message saying, please don't share this, or if you share it anonymously. Pictures of kids, a desk with a pile of tissues that from the child crying through the entire testing window. Another teacher telling me that her student went into the bathroom, threw up, and was told that they have to just keep plugging away and try to finish the test. And another kid that sat till 3 o'clock, from 9 o'clock in the morning. Many stories of those teachers saying, oh my God, these kids sat for 6 hours. You're talking about an 8-year-old. And I think the takeaway for this, for people who don't live in New York, they're not they don't have a board of regents. The idea was to identify who has the power. Who has the power? How do we get to those people? How do we influence those people? What is it? So that can be done anywhere, where you figure out who exactly is holding the cards here. Like, who's making these policies? And sometimes it would surprise you, because you think it's, it looks like on paper it would be this person, but then you find out, well, yeah, but they're influenced by this. And then you find out, well, how can we put pressure on them? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that's the networking. That's getting members and using Facebook and saying, hey, and make it simple. Here's an email that we need you guys to send. So we would put an email out and say, just click on this and you get sent. So these, whoever we needed to pressure, they'd get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails sent from all over New York, or just their area, or however we were trying to be smart about where you need to put pressure and how to put pressure. And I think that was, really key is to being smart about that and figuring out, this is the pressure that needs to be applied. This is the person that needs to get that. So you really do have to find out, even locally. So even if you're talking about just your local district, you still need to find out who is controlling the situation. Is it the superintendent that really has the control? Is this really a principal thing? Is the superintendent just following a state ed mandate? So then do we need to go after the mandate? Or is this the Board of Ed that's really pushing the superintendent to do? So really finding out where the power structure is, who has it, who's influencing it, and then targeting in a smart way, targeting those people. So
when our press releases would name certain policymakers in there, and getting media around it, anything that a lawmaker or policymaker does not want bad press. And now that they're using social media to push their platforms, well,
media is so important. There is shifts that happen all the time, because there's different issues that get brought up. That, corporate reformers, they're not, if we beat them on one issue, they're not going to just go away and say, and pack up their toys and go home. Corporate reformers, they'll, this is heavy money. This is just an ungodly amount of money. They're not going to give up. They'll just find another way in.
An overall framework of education technology and the investments that are going in there. One insight into New York is we passed a bond, our state, called the Smart School Bond, which would basically bring broadband width and wireless and computers to districts. So I would say, okay, new age technology, we got to move forward. It was as insidious as Google's chairman, Eric Schmidt, visiting and advising our own governor, Cuomo, about the Smart School Bond. Because when they were developing the marketing for it, who wouldn't vote for something, and that should have been, contested in the courts, something called SMART, the whole marketing of it was really bad, because people wouldn't vote necessarily against something that's not smart. It brought to me that set the framework up and continue to perpetuate the ability for people who make money off of education to come into our state and across the country. So if you think about it, if not every school district is set up for computers, how are you going to get local assessments and education-based or education technology applications going? And all behind this is this data collection of information, data mining. People will even criticize us and say, oh, you know, while you were spending time and opting out of these bubble so-called tests, the vultures and the venture capitalists were setting up the framework to come in and figure out how are we going to make money off of this multi-billion-dollar education industry. And at the end of the day,
being a movement that's this large and has this many connections and has this much political power and has this much sort of, you know, access to the people that need to be accessed, I think we have a responsibility that when something affects public schools, I mean, any other issues that really aren't a public school issue, maybe I would just do that on my own time. But if it affects public schools and public school kids and the way that our kids are being taught and the way the schools are being run, to me, that's fair game. And we have a responsibility to jump in on that stuff and weigh in, and people follow us, not just because they're opt-out parents, but they follow us personally. They trust us. They feel, you know, they've known us for 5 years, speaking and protecting their kids and spending the time. I'll spend an hour on the phone with a parent talking them through, you know, a problem that they're having, you know, opting their kid out or whatever else. I'll spend that time with them so they know that they know I'm willing to give up my life and my time to this. So there's trust that's been built over the last 5 years with our supporters and with our followers.
And there's so many parents out there that have become and educators and community members and grandmas and grandpas who become their own leaders. And we can't say we don't know how anymore. We know how. And so, as Jeanette said, when an issue comes up, you know, we know how to address it and to get to the heart of it. And we believe that our intentions, I know our intentions are authentic and pure. And we've always stuck with that. And it's always served us well, and the people that work with us. And it's just incredible, the people that we've met along this journey. And all the great ideas. I'm just always amazed by all the great ideas.
You know, the power of advocacy is empowerment. A parent just needs to feel like they have a right to advocate for their kid. They have the knowledge to advocate for them. Nobody wants to walk into like a board meeting or a meeting with administrators and not know what they're talking about if they're trying to advocate for their kid. So we give them information. We teach them what we know. We tell them everything. We give them all the resources they need to then feel comfortable going in and advocating for their child. So parents feel empowered, and that empowerment then is going to translate. And it's going to look different for every district. We don't tell them, your district should look like this. You know, we say to them, what do you want your district to look like? What do you want your classroom to look like? We'll help you get there. Here's how you can advocate for that. I'm still advocating for things personally in my own small district. We didn't change completely, you know, what we're advocating for. So everything that we do still has that underlying, very strong, very clear, very simple as well. You know, we try not to get too much in the weeds on, you know, and too academic and too, you know, you have to be able to speak to people, you know, where they really can connect with what you're trying to show them and teach them. And that's, you know, translating everything, all these big things that are out there, you know, parents, it's like that, you know, whatever, 2-second soundbite, they have to just be able to, you know, see a meme and get some information. They need to be able to, you know, see a video and get that information. And it's got to be quick, and it's got to be easy, and it's got to be accessible. And we've sort of figured out a little bit of that formula, is how you do that, how you get that message to them that they need to hear, and how do you do it in a way that's easily digestible.